if even to the tune of you being pet owners that made Jim and Eleanor part of every vacation you ever had, because the last thing you did before you took off was bring the dogs to Eleanor and Jim, and that you felt good about it, and you felt great about when you got back, and you shared your vacation with them. So they were always that for everybody here. Many of you here, I know. For the fellow artists, he was a champion. Everybody loved him. He was kind. He was helpful. Of course, his work was excellent and broad in terms of how many years he did it, how well he did it. For those lucky enough to have been students, either at Ball State or in private lessons, he was the same thing. The word kind always comes up because being a professor of art sometimes doesn't mean you're the kindest person on the block. But he found a way to do that in critiquing honestly and truthfully, but also to be kind about it. He got me out of a jam when I had him in drawing because I couldn't get up at 7:30 in the morning to get there. But let me make it up back in, this is a couple years ago. Like 1974. So, I'm going to talk about mentorship. Carl brought that up. He was that as well. So he was a teacher. He's an artist. He's the pet savior. But as a mentor, he would talk to people about their careers. He would talk to people about their art, even in a private way. Just say, "Can you tell me a little bit about what you think about this?" But also in business, he was an advisor and a good counsel. So. Many of you here own paintings of Jim's. I'm sure many of you do. Or maybe you were lucky. If you are lucky enough to do that, that's great. Many of you perhaps sat in offices in corporations around the area, like Lord Warner or Muncie Power or Lift Aloft, or there's one more I'm thinking of, the Ontario Corporation. Maxim Corporation, thank you. Dave will talk more about this, I believe. But if you're lucky enough to sit in these businesses and enjoy the commission work that Jim's did, often extensive series of works that sort of exposed the heartbeat of the company, usually the manufacturing facilities that were the basis for all these corporate headquarters. They would be the people in the factories, forging things and welding things and building things, or it could be the machines that were made by Lift Aloft or Muncie Power to show just the product, but would usually be throughout their facility. So anyway, that's another way that it was exposed his art throughout this area. Also, when I want to go back to the friends that he has as the artists, also when all of the organizations that he belonged to, like Watercolor Society of Indiana, the Brown County Art Guild, those people fell in love with him right away. They would ask about it every time they'd see me. It's like, fine, you're here, what about Jim? But he was that kind of special person. You all know what I'm talking about, so I'm here to just sort of remind us all. Everybody here probably was his friend. It's one of those things where he was that guy. I've been lucky enough to be all of the above criteria or categories that I just mentioned. Had him as a student, or had him as a teacher, like I said before. And one of the things I'm going to highlight is the mentorship that I engaged with him. He was a part of the business that we finally began. By the way, Jenny and I he met her, I believe, while we were printing our wedding invitations in the serigraphy room, in which we were kind of on the sly, sneaking the space. We had our own ink, so we weren't stealing. But anyway, he met her, and they fell in love right then. But he was very gracious about that. I want to talk about the mentorship part of this, where there was a point in my career where I had been accepted to the MFA program in Miami of Ohio, and with a graduate assistantship. And at the time, I had a 1-year-old son, and I had a mortgage and a house here, and I had a nice design job. And it was one of these things where I couldn't figure out how I was going to make this work, or even why or if I was going to make this work. Finally, I went out to Jim's house, and we circled the barn a few times just talking about this thing until he finally opened my eyes and just said the words, are you really dying to be a teacher? And the answer was no, not really. I have done a lot of teaching, but that wasn't why I was trying to do this. And he said, well, what is it about an MFA that you think is necessary? And I said, well, I suppose it's going to be validating, so I want to be an artist. And he said, why don't you just go home and make paintings? And I was like, duh, okay. It's as simple as that, okay? And what I did then was use the model, what we did then, was use the model of Jim's business as Faulkner. You know, he had his studios there on the grounds, he had the kennels, and they did training. It was just all there in a compound. And so the next thing I did after that was to build that sort of model business at home called Gordy Studios, which was a frame shop and an art studio. So it was one of those things where, yes, he gave me the advice and sort of freed me from having to. So I declined the MFA position and stayed home and then did the Gordy Studios, turned it into this. You know, we bought this and turned it in there. So it was just a big influence on me, and for no better reason than he clarified it for me in a very loving way. Another big thing between Jim and I was that, and anybody here who's a watercolor painter will attest to this, that among watercolor painters, there's a brotherhood, okay? Watercolors are done like no other art is done, where you're actually beyond, if you're talking to an oil painter, everything is exactly the opposite of how you do an oil painting when you're doing watercolor. The white is the paper. It's not the white we put on the paper. So everything is based on the idea of a solution of transparent paint put on white paper. The light, when you want a light color or a light value of a color, you're going to just make it thinner so that more of the white paper shines through. It's a transparent process. So all in all, you're trying to make the white of the paper stay white where you want the final white. It's got to stay that way. You got to keep it. So you can block it out, or just keep it. And then all of the marks that you use, the techniques used in watercolor it's a wash, or which could be applied on pre-wetted paper, which would be called wet on wet in watercolor language, which makes sense. And then also dry brush would be the other tactic or technique, where it's a matter of a rather thicker solution of paint applied onto a dry paper. So generally speaking, you use all of these in combination, in varying combinations, may over and over, maybe stacking this way or that. But generally between watercolors or among watercolors, you're usually either somebody who's more about the brush stroke and the dry brush, or somebody who's more about the washes that are put on very wet and smooth. So you got a textural approach or smooth. Jim and I differed in that approach, where he was a man who did a lot, as you see these things around here, there's a lot of brush work in his work, there's a lot of dry brush, and even he would coax it by using a fan brush, that he would carve out little nicks out of his fan brush, so that you'll see that in the work behind me here, where he has actually crisscrossed the brush strokes with those sort of purposely damaged brushes to make these effects. You'll see it even in this, as you walk up the hill, you see the crisscrossing brush strokes. So, and a lot of that was because of his plein air capability. I mean, he liked to work out in the world, not taking photographs. Use photographs sometimes, but generally speaking, as a plein air, that you can't really, with an upright water, with an upright paper, you can't really put a flood of material on there, because it's just going to run down, for one thing. So you have to adapt that way. But he adapted in ways that are really appreciable here, where you can see, you know, the certain, is that the one I'm thinking of? Yeah, when you see the just the minor statement of that oak tree there, done with rather flat, but then you see the brush strokes that are linear. So that's the other thing, is he would actually use lettering brushes and script brushes, those kinds of things, and it was a rather direct process. So the final story I have about Jim is in regard to this, is that he and I got together. We both found out that Winslow and Homer was having an exhibit. They were having a Winslow Homer exhibit in the National Gallery in DC, and we decided to fly out there together to see it. And, you know, like I said, I've illustrated that we had different approaches to doing these paintings, but when we got there, you could buy a ticket that would allow you to enter, but then it would allow you to re-enter for 2 days. And I think the count was 7 or 8 times that we went back to the exhibit. And I think we were being watched because we would get up close and we would sort of mentally pick the paintings apart to you know, figure out how the order of things went. And it was, you know, each time we'd go there and then we would talk, we would try to go out and paint on the grounds there, the Capitol building and that area. And then we would go back, you know, with cases of paintings and, you know, things that were frowned upon by carrying around. In fact, at the end of a painting session, we actually were, I was investigated because I had a black case with me, and they thought that was a really good place to hide a bomb, I guess. There was nothing explosive in there, and they let me out of jail real early. Anyway, it was an interesting part to that, but what we learned about the Winslow Homer exhibit and what we learned about the way each of us thinks about painting was really important to me. I assume maybe important to him, that each approach that we took was sort of, you know, in combination was what Winslow Homer was doing. Who happens, if you don't know, is one of the more famous watercolors in America from the late 1800s. But anyway, he was a hero of both Jim's and mine. How do I close this? One of the things that we talked about a lot was the techniques that we were not aware were really okay to use. For instance, one of the paintings was 2 herons in a Florida landscape, like a jungle type landscape. We realized that there was, in the original painting, his first go at it, there was only 1 heron. And then and we saw that what he did was he took a knife and cut around a heron shape and peeled the paper off where he had already put the jungle painting to put another heron in that. And it's like, that just blew my mind that you could actually carve a hunk out of your own painting. But then he would paint back into it, even though it was going to have like a feathery, textury water paper on it. And he made that work. And he did that with other things too, like a pumpkin patch thing that he had, where he would tear them out and then paint back into them. Reflections on water, because Winslow Homer, like Jim, painted in as plein air, painted in nature while doing this, and so it was a matter of, I'm going to get it down, and then I'm going to carve it back. So it's one of those things that we have both appreciated about that. And I still, when I taught watercolor after I came back from that, I used a lot of the examples I learned from Winslow Homer. But anyway, it was a wonderful time that we had, and the plane ride home was very energetic because we couldn't talk enough about what we had just seen. That's all I have here. I want to just announce my appreciation, obviously, for the man. My family loved him. We miss him. I'm going to introduce Dave Dale to What's that?
Do you really know who I am?
Yeah, I got you. So thank you. This is Dave Dale.